Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Julie Allen.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of February 6th, and this is your Monday briefing. Both chambers of Congress will be in session next week. The House will depart at the end of next week for a 2-week President's Day recess, and the Senate will take a 1-week recess the week of February 20th. President Biden will deliver the annual State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress on Tuesday, February 7th. Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders will deliver the Republican response. The Biden administration announced that the president's fiscal year 2024 budget will be released on March 9th. The House Ways and Means Committee will hold a February 6th field hearing in Petersburg, West Virginia on the state of the economy and a February 8th hearing on unemployment insurance fraud.
As Scott mentioned, President Biden will deliver the annual State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress tomorrow night. And Chairman Dave Camp joins us to discuss what he expects to hear from the president as he lays out his priorities for the coming year. Chairman Camp, welcome.
Well, Julie, Scott, thanks for having me. Great to be with you. It really is an exciting night at the State of the Union. Certainly the House and Senate are invited. Some members decline to attend, but most of the members of the House and Senate attend. You have the president's cabinet, you'll have members of the Supreme Court, you'll have members of the diplomatic corps, ambassadors from all around the world will attend. And it really is an opportunity for the president to lay out his agenda. You'll also see a response from Republicans to the State of the Union, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the governor of Arkansas, and there will also be a Working Families Party response after the Republican response from Congresswoman Ramirez of Illinois.
So, Chairman Camp, I love that you give that background. And as a former member of Congress, can you tell us what it's like to be on the House floor on the night of the State of the Union address?
Well, in some sense, you really get a feeling that history's being made because this is the president setting forth his priorities and telling us what his agenda will be. And so that it's listened to very intently. It's the biggest audience the president will have all year. Certainly, many times the biggest audience members of Congress will have in the sense of you'll be on TV afterwards, commenting on the speech. You'll have press reports. And then the president often not only travels before the speech as President Biden has been, but also then you'll see President Biden travel around the country trying to make his case to the American people about what he said that night. So it really is an important speech. The other exciting thing about that night is there often are members of the audience, and we understand that the family of Mr. Nichols, who was killed in Memphis, will be there as well, and other guests in the gallery that make it really some part politics, some part policy, some part campaigning, and some part theater. But it really is can be an emotional and exciting evening.
Chairman Camp, you had mentioned that the national address is an opportunity to lay out the administration's priorities for the coming year. On that matter, what do you expect to hear from the president tomorrow night?
Well, I think the overall goal of the president will be to demonstrate his electability. And I think to do that, because we're just at the beginning of him potentially announcing a second term, I think he'll talk about his accomplishments and that his economic plan is working. I think he'll really speak about the bipartisan infrastructure bill and how that's good for the country. So he'll be talking about his agenda. I think you might see him mention possibly the corporate alternative minimum tax, because this was something he talked about frequently in the campaign, that companies had book income but paid no federal income tax. So I think he'll talk about that issue as one of his accomplishments as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if we heard something about foreign policy. I mean, there's a continuing war in Ukraine, and we have increased tensions with China, not just recent events, but certainly in the technology and trade space.
And thanks for that overview of the priorities and then some of the things that we'll see. You know, it's interesting. This is the first time President Biden will face a divided Congress. And do you expect the president's speech and then the Republican response to contain potential areas of bipartisan consensus?
Well, I think it will be interesting in how he speaks to the country in terms of trying to unify the country, which presidents do in the State of the Union. But I think this president will also attempt to draw a contrast with Republicans, particularly over the debt limit. I think the big question is, will he identify areas of bipartisanship in that speech? And certainly there are those areas that we know about, not only just on the debt limit, which will require bipartisanship, but issues like immigration, maybe even policing reform. And will the president then reach out and identify those areas? But I think part of this speech will also be, how does he unify his supporters? How does he rally the Democratic base? So it really is kind of straddling those two attempts to demonstrate his electability to his own party, but also finding ways to unify the country.
And lastly, Chairman Camp, one specific issue that will require bipartisanship is raising the debt ceiling. Last Wednesday, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy met with President Biden at the White House, where they discussed a range of issues, but mainly the debt ceiling. So how do you see that specific issue playing out over the coming months?
Well, I think the good thing is that they did have the meeting and that they're beginning to sort of address this issue earlier on than has occurred in some past debt limit events. Both sides said that positive things about the meeting. That's also good. There apparently seems to be an indication there will be more. This is an issue that really doesn't, become critical for several months. So it's early days on the debt limit. I think you'll have to see a lot of things happen. The president will have to release his budget. Will Republicans be able to come up with a budget? What will be sort of the parameters of those, goalposts in terms of both of their budgets? And will there be areas to reform this? This is always a difficult issue because the debt limit actually represents money that has already been spent. So in a sense, it is, will the federal government continue to pay its bills? But then the problem is, how then do you find ways, and many Republicans and some Democrats as well are very concerned about the level of our debt, and how do you find ways to get on a more sustainable path in terms of our spending policy? And that's always a problem, because when we get to the point where the government needs to be funded for the following year, it's, well, we can't shut down the government. So there really is this tension over those two issues. And it really is an area that does need some bipartisan attention, and ultimately will have to be bipartisan at the end of the day.
Chairman Camp, as always, thank you very much for your insights and for your time. Appreciate it.
And thank you. Take care.
Be sure to check out the latest Week in Review with Andrew Pryor and special episodes on recent Pillar 2 guidance included in the description of this episode. And as always, stay tuned for this Friday's Week in Review.
And as always, thank you for spending this time with us. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.